The rain hammered against the windows of the Ashford Manor like 1,000 urgent fingers, as if the sky itself was trying to reveal the secret that lay hidden in the servants' quarters. Sarah Chen pressed her back against the door of her small room, her heart pounding so hard she was certain it would wake the entire household. In her trembling hands, she held a bundle wrapped in the softest towels she'd dared to take from the linen closet, towels that cost more than she'd earned in a month at any of her previous jobs. Inside the bundle, two tiny faces peered up at her with unfocused eyes, their rosebud mouths opening and closing like little birds. Her daughters. Her beautiful, impossible daughters. 27 years old, and Sarah had thought she'd seen every variety of hardship life could offer. She'd grown up in foster care, worked 3 jobs to put herself through community college, and had finally landed what seemed like a dream position as head housekeeper at one of Manhattan's most prestigious private residences. The pay was extraordinary, the room and board included, and her employer, the notoriously reclusive billionaire Alexander Ashford, rarely even acknowledged her existence beyond a curt nod in the hallways. It was supposed to be her fresh start, her chance to save money, to build something resembling a future. Then Marcus happened, charming, handsome Marcus from the catering company that serviced the manor's rare dinner parties. He'd whispered promises and painted dreams until she'd let down every guard she'd spent years constructing. Then came the pregnancy test, and Marcus vanished like morning mist, leaving behind nothing but a disconnected phone number and the debris of her shattered plans. She'd hidden the pregnancy beneath loose uniforms and careful positioning. The manor was so vast, and Mr. Ashford so deliberately distant, that it had been easier than she'd imagined. She'd planned to leave before the birth, to find some way to make it work on her own, but the twins had come early, 6 weeks early, in the middle of the night when the storm had prevented any possibility of reaching a hospital without raising questions she couldn't answer. Now, as she lowered the twins into the sturdy cardboard box she'd lined with blankets and positioned beneath her bed, Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. The box had once held imported Italian linens, another luxury from a world she maintained but could never inhabit. Now it cradled her entire universe. "I'm so sorry," she whispered to her daughters as she carefully arranged the blankets around their tiny forms. "I'm so sorry. But Mommy will figure this out. I promise." The smaller twin, born second, weighing barely 4 pounds, let out a whimper, and Sarah's breath caught. She discovered during those terrifying hours of labor that she was capable of bringing life into the world alone, but she was learning now that keeping that life secret was an entirely different kind of agony. She knew the rules. Alexander Ashford's instructions to his household staff had been crystal clear from her very first day: no guests, no overnight visitors, and absolutely, under no circumstances, were children permitted in the manor. He'd built his empire on precision and control, and his home reflected that obsession. Every surface gleamed. Every corner held purpose. There was no room in Alexander Ashford's meticulously ordered life for the chaos that children represented. Sarah had heard the whispers from the other staff, the cook, the driver, the groundskeeper. Mr. Ashford's younger sister had died in a car accident when he was 22, along with her 3-year-old daughter. He'd been driving. He'd survived. They hadn't. Since then, he'd restructured his entire existence to eliminate anything that reminded him of that loss. No family photos. No children's laughter. Nothing that could crack the ice he'd frozen himself in. Understanding his pain didn't change Sarah's reality. If he discovered the twins, she'd be terminated immediately. And in this economy, with no references, no savings beyond the meager amount she'd managed to set aside, and 2 newborns to care for, she'd end up exactly where she'd started, or worse. The twins needed to feed again. Sarah could feel the pressure in her breasts, the biological imperative her body insisted upon regardless of the impossible circumstances. She lifted them one at a time, settling into the worn armchair in the corner of her room with a twin at each breast, and let the tears fall freely as they nursed. In the silence broken only by the rain and the soft sounds of her daughter's feeding, Sarah made plans. She'd take her breaks in her room. She'd make excuses to avoid the communal staff meals. She'd work twice as hard to ensure no one had reason to enter her quarters. The twins were quiet babies, a blessing that felt like mercy. If she could just keep them hidden for a few weeks, maybe she could find a way out. A new job that allowed for children. An apartment she could afford. Anything. She'd just finished burping the smaller twin when she heard footsteps in the hallway outside her door. Heavy footsteps. Male footsteps. Her blood turned to ice. The staff quarters were in the East Wing, far from Mr. Ashford's private suite. He never came to this section of the manor. Never. In her 18 months of employment, she'd never once seen him venture beyond the main floors and his own secluded wing. The footsteps paused outside her door. Sarah held her breath, pressing both twins against her chest, willing them to remain silent. Her mind raced through excuses, explanations, anything that might account for the soft sounds that might have escaped her room. But the footsteps moved on, continuing down the hallway toward the storage rooms at the far end. She waited 10 minutes, then 20, before she dared to move. Carefully, tenderly, she placed both twins back in their box bed, tucking the blankets around them with shaking hands. The larger twin yawned, her tiny fist waving in the air. The smaller one had already fallen asleep, her chest rising and falling with rapid, bird-like breaths. "My brave girls," Sarah whispered, brushing her fingers across their impossibly soft cheeks. "My sweet, brave girls." As she finally climbed into her own bed, exhaustion crashing over her in waves, Sarah Chin did something she hadn't done since she was a child in the foster system. She prayed. Not to any particular god. She'd never been quite sure what she believed, but to the universe itself, to whatever force governed the turning of the world. "Please," she thought, "just let us survive this. Just give me enough time to find a way." Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the city clean, carrying secrets down into the sewers and out to the sea. And beneath Sarah's bed, two tiny hearts beat on, unaware that their very existence had just set in motion a chain of events that would shatter the carefully constructed walls of the Ashford Manor and the frozen heart of the man who ruled it. 3 days. Sarah had managed to keep the twins hidden for 3 impossible days. She'd learned to function on 20-minute intervals of sleep, snatched between feedings and her duties. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and she'd lost weight she couldn't afford to lose, her uniform hanging looser on her already slender frame. But she'd managed. She kept the twins fed, clean, and most importantly, silent. Until Thursday afternoon. Sarah was on her hands and knees in the library, polishing the Italian marble floor, when she heard it, a sound that made her stomach drop like a stone.
Crying.
Faint, muffled by distance and the heavy oak door of her room, but unmistakably the sound of an infant in distress. Her head snapped up, and she met the eyes of Mrs. Patterson, the cook, who had just entered carrying Mr. Ashford's afternoon tea service. The older woman's expression shifted from pleasant neutrality to confusion, her head tilting as she tried to place the unusual sound echoing through the typically silent manor. "Did you hear?" Mrs. Patterson began. "Probably the neighbor's cat," Sarah interrupted, her voice coming out too high, too desperate. "I've heard it yowling the past few days. Sounds almost human, doesn't it?" Mrs. Patterson's skeptical look said she didn't quite believe the explanation, but before she could press further, Sarah had abandoned her polishing and was rushing toward the staff quarters, her heart threatening to hammer right through her chest. She burst into her room to find both twins crying. The larger one had woken the smaller, and now they were both working themselves into a state. With shaking hands, Sarah scooped them up, bouncing and shushing, trying desperately to soothe them. The smaller twin was burning up.
Fever.
How had she not noticed the fever? Panic seized her throat. She'd read all the pregnancy and childcare books she could find in the public library, memorizing passages about newborn care. Fever in a 3-day-old infant was serious. It could be an infection. It could be meningitis. It could be a dozen terrifying things that required immediate medical attention. But taking her to a hospital meant discovery. It meant losing her job. It meant the smaller twins' cry weakened, becoming a thin, reedy sound that terrified Sarah more than the louder wails had. She pressed her lips to her daughter's forehead. The baby was definitely too warm. "No, no, no," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Please, baby girl. Please be okay." She'd been so focused on keeping them hidden that she'd forgotten they were fragile. They were premature. They needed more than secrecy and mother's milk. They needed proper care. The larger twin had quieted, but the smaller one continued her weak crying, her tiny fists trembling. Sarah made a decision. She wrapped both babies in the softest towels she had, grabbed her purse, and headed for the servants' entrance. She'd take them to the emergency room. She'd face whatever consequences came. Her pride, her job, her plans. None of it mattered if her daughter was seriously ill. She'd just reached the back staircase when she heard footsteps ascending from below. Heavy, measured footsteps. She froze, holding the twins close, and then Alexander Ashford rounded the corner. They stood 3 feet apart, separated by a shocked silence that seemed to stretch into infinity. Sarah watched her employer's face cycle through expressions: surprise, confusion, and then something that looked almost like recognition, though that made no sense. Alexander Ashford at 34 was formidable in a way that had nothing to do with his 6'2" frame or the hand-tailored suits he wore like armor. It was his eyes, gray as a winter storm, that made people hesitate, made them choose their words carefully. Those eyes had a way of seeing through pretense, of calculating value, and finding most things wanting. Right now, those eyes were fixed on the bundle in Sarah's arms, where a tiny hand had worked its way free of the towels. "Mr. Ashford," Sarah began, her voice cracking. "I can explain." "How old?" His voice was rough, as if the words were dragged from somewhere deep and unused. 3 days, Sarah whispered. "They're 3 days old. And I know the rules, I know children aren't allowed, but please, I think one of them is sick, and I was just trying to get to the hospital." "They?" Alexander's eyes widened fractionally. "Twins." Sarah nodded, unable to form words around the fear clogging her throat. This was it. This was the end of everything. But Alexander Ashford didn't yell. He didn't order her out. Instead, he stepped closer, and with movements that seemed almost unconscious, he pulled back the towel to reveal both tiny faces. The larger twin had fallen back asleep, but the smaller one gazed up at him with unfocused eyes, her cry reduced to a whimper. Something happened to Alexander's face then. The ice that usually armored his expression cracked, revealing a glimpse of naked pain beneath. His hand, which had been reaching toward the babies, dropped to his side. "The smaller one has a fever," Sarah said urgently, maternal instinct overriding her fear of him. "I need to get her to a doctor. I'll go right now. I'll pack my things afterward. I promise I'll be gone by tonight." "Stop." The word was sharp enough to cut. "You're not going anywhere." Sarah's breath caught. "Please, Mr. Ashford, I know I violated the rules, but my daughter needs—" "I'm calling my personal physician. Dr. Morrison makes house calls." Alexander was already pulling out his phone, his fingers moving with the decisiveness of a man accustomed to solving problems through sheer force of will and resources. "He'll be here within the hour." "I can't afford." "Did I ask you to pay?" His tone was curt, almost angry, but his eyes remained fixed on the smaller twin. "Go to the blue guest room. 2nd floor, west wing. It's warm, quiet, and has a bathroom attached. Take the babies there. I'll send Dr. Morrison up when he arrives." Sarah stood frozen, unable to reconcile this response with everything she knew about Alexander Ashford. The man who had banned children from his home was directing her to his guest quarters? "Ms. Chun." He looked up from his phone, and the expression on his face was complicated. Pain and something else, something almost like fear. "Your daughter needs medical attention. Are you going to stand here arguing, or are you going to let me help?" The smaller twin let out another weak cry, and the decision made itself. Sarah nodded and hurried past him toward the main staircase. Behind her, she heard him speaking rapidly into his phone, his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of a man who expected to be obeyed. The blue guest room was more beautiful than any space Sarah had ever inhabited. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the manicured gardens, now gray with winter. The furniture was antique, but maintained to perfection. The bed was king-sized, covered in linens that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. She laid the twins on the bed, surrounding them with pillows to prevent any possibility of rolling. The smaller one's fever felt higher. Sarah's hands shook as she stripped her down to her diaper, trying to remember everything she'd read about managing infant fevers. A knock at the door made her jump. "Come in," she called, expecting a staff member or perhaps Dr. Morrison already arrived. It was Alexander. He carried a basin of cool water and soft cloths. Without speaking, he set them on the nightstand beside the bed. Then he stood there, his hands hanging awkwardly at his sides, his eyes fixed on the twins. "The larger one," Sarah said softly, needing to fill the heavy silence. "I named her Emma. And the smaller one is Lily." "Lily," Alexander repeated, the name seeming to catch in his throat. "That was my niece's name." The air in the room shifted, becoming charged with unspoken history. Sarah remembered the whispers, the tragedy that had reshaped this man's life. She opened her mouth to say she could change the name that she had known, but Alexander was already shaking his head. "It's a beautiful name," he said quietly. "It suits her." He moved closer to the bed, and Sarah held her breath as his hand hovered over baby Lily's small form. For a moment, she thought he would touch her, would make that connection, but instead he pulled back, his jaw tightening. "Dr. Morrison is 10 minutes away," he said, his voice returning to its usual controlled tone. "He's the best pediatrician in the city. If Lily needs to be hospitalized, I'll make the arrangements. If she can be treated here, we'll ensure she has everything she needs." "Mr. Ashford, I don't understand." "Neither do I," he interrupted, and for the first time since she'd known him, Alexander Ashford looked uncertain. "I have one rule about children. One rule. And you've been hiding newborn twins in my house for 3 days." "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered. "I was desperate. I had nowhere else to go." "Where's their father?" The blunt question hit like a slap. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with shame and anger.
"Gone."
"He was gone before I even knew I was pregnant." Alexander nodded, as if this confirmed something he'd suspected. He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving between the twins. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "My sister was 19 when she got pregnant. The father disappeared too. Our parents disowned her. I was the only one who stood by her." Sarah hadn't known this part of the story. The public narrative around the Ashford family tragedy had focused on the accident itself, not the circumstances that led to it. "She was a good mother," Alexander continued, still not looking at Sarah.
"The best."
"And Lily, my niece, she was everything bright and beautiful in this world. When I lost them—" He stopped, his throat working. "I told myself I'd never allow that kind of vulnerability again. No children. No reminders. Nothing that could break me like that again." "I understand," Sarah said, even though she didn't, not really. "I'll leave as soon as Lily is stable." "You've been more than generous." "You're not leaving." Sarah blinked. "But you said—" "I said a lot of things. I made a lot of rules." Alexander finally looked at her directly, and the pain in his eyes was so raw it made her own heart ache. "But you have 2 newborn daughters who need care. One of them is sick. And you have nowhere to go. Am I wrong?" Sarah wanted to lie, to claim she had options, but the truth was written all over her exhausted face. She shook her head. "Then you'll stay," Alexander said firmly. "You and Emma and Lily. You'll move into this suite. You'll continue to receive your salary, but your primary responsibility will be caring for your daughters. When Dr. Morrison arrives, we'll determine what Lily needs. And then," he paused, seeming to gather himself, "and then we'll figure out the rest." Before Sarah could respond, another knock sounded at the door. Dr. Morrison had arrived, a silver-haired man with kind eyes who moved to Lily's side with practiced efficiency. Alexander stepped back, giving him room to work, but he didn't leave. He stood against the wall, his arms crossed over his chest, watching as the doctor examined the tiny patient. "Likely just a minor infection," Dr. Morrison announced after several minutes. Common in premature twins. I'll prescribe antibiotics, and we'll monitor her closely. But she should be fine. Sarah felt her knees go weak with relief. She reached out to steady herself and found Alexander's hand beneath her elbow, supporting her weight. "Thank you," she whispered, to the doctor, to her employer, to the universe that had somehow transformed her disaster into this strange mercy. Dr. Morrison provided detailed instructions, wrote prescriptions, and promised to return the next day to check on Lily. When he left, Sarah found herself alone again with Alexander and her daughters. "You should rest," Alexander said. "I'll have Mrs. Patterson bring up food. You look like you haven't eaten properly in days." "I haven't," Sarah admitted. "I was too afraid to leave them alone for long." Something flickered across Alexander's face, respect, perhaps, or recognition of the fierce protectiveness that drove her. "You're a good mother," he said quietly. "They're lucky to have you." Before she could respond, he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Sarah sank onto the bed beside her daughters, hardly daring to believe what had just happened. The man who banned children from his home had just offered them sanctuary. She didn't understand it. She didn't dare question it. She simply gathered her daughters close and, for the first time in 3 days, allowed herself to fully breathe. The following weeks unfolded like a dream Sarah kept expecting to end with a harsh awakening. But morning after morning, she woke in the luxurious blue suite with her daughters sleeping peacefully in the beautiful bassinet Alexander had purchased, one of many items that had appeared as if by magic. Premium formula for supplementing her milk. Soft cotton onesies in the tiniest sizes. A changing table stocked with every conceivable necessity. A baby monitor system more sophisticated than anything Sarah had seen in stores. Alexander himself remained a paradox. He never entered the suite unless invited, but Sarah would find evidence of his presence. Fresh flowers on the side table, a note about Dr. Morrison's scheduled visit, a book on premature infant care left outside her door. He was present without intruding, helpful without overwhelming. The shift in the household's atmosphere was palpable. Mrs. Patterson, initially shocked by the revelation of the twins, had become their most devoted admirer, sneaking upstairs between meal preparations to coo over them. The groundskeeper, a taciturn man named Henry, had quietly cleared a section of the east garden and installed a bench where Sarah could sit with the girls once the weather warmed. But it was Alexander's transformation that left Sarah speechless. The man who had built walls of ice around his heart was slowly, carefully, beginning to let them melt. It started 3 weeks after Lily's fever broke. Sarah was in the suite sitting area, holding both girls and singing softly, when she heard a knock. Expecting Mrs. Patterson with lunch, she called for the visitor to enter. Alexander stepped in, and for the first time since this began, he looked uncertain. In his hands, he carried a wooden box with a brass latch. "I'm sorry to intrude," he said, hovering near the doorway. "I can come back if this isn't a good time."
"No, please."
"Come in." Sarah shifted the twins, making room on the couch. "What's that?" Alexander moved into the room with careful steps, as if approaching something fragile that might shatter if he moved too quickly. He set the box on the coffee table and opened it to reveal an antique music box. When he wound the key, a delicate melody filled the air, Brahms' lullaby. "It was my niece's," he said quietly. "My sister's Lily. I haven't been able to open this box in 12 years. He looked up at Sarah, and the vulnerability in his expression made her chest tighten. "But I thought perhaps your Lily might like it. If that's not too strange." "It's not strange at all," Sarah whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "It's beautiful." Emma had fallen asleep in Sarah's arms, but little Lily was awake, her dark eyes seeming to track the movement of the music box's spinning figurine. Alexander watched her watch it, and something cracked further in his careful composure. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the baby. Sarah's breath caught. In all the weeks she'd been in this suite, Alexander had never asked to hold either twin. He'd stood at a distance, watching, but never crossing that line. Now he was asking to bridge that gap. "Of course," Sarah said softly, carefully transferring Lily into his waiting arms. Alexander's hands shook as he cradled the tiny infant. He was so large and she was so small, barely 6 pounds now despite Dr. Morrison's assurances that she was thriving. For a long moment, he simply stood there, looking down at the baby in his arms with an expression of mingled wonder and agony. "I forgot," he said, his voice rough. "I forgot how impossibly small they are. How fragile. But strong," Sarah added gently. "Lily was born 6 weeks early, and look at her now. Fighting. Surviving." Alexander nodded, unable to take his eyes off the baby. Lily yawned, her tiny fist waving in the air, and Alexander lifted his finger to her hand. Her fingers closed around it instinctively, and Sarah watched tears slide down his face. "My Lily used to do that," he whispered. "Grab onto my finger like I was her anchor." His voice broke. "The day of the accident, I was taking them to the park. It was raining, but my sister was so tired, and I insisted we could still go. I insisted. The roads were slick, and the truck ran the red light, and I couldn't." He stopped, his chest heaving with suppressed sobs. Sarah stood, still holding Emma, and moved to his side. With her free hand, she touched his arm. "Alexander, it wasn't your fault. Wasn't it?" He looked at her with eyes full of ancient pain. "I was driving. I survived without a scratch and they—" "A truck ran a red light," Sarah interrupted firmly. "You didn't cause that. You didn't choose that. It was a terrible, terrible accident, and you've been punishing yourself for 12 years for something that was never your fault." Alexander's tears fell onto Lily's blanket. The baby, unbothered, continued to grip his finger with surprising strength. "I built this whole existence around never feeling that pain again," he said. "I removed every reminder. Made rules that ensured I'd never have to face what I lost. And then you—" He shook his head. "You appeared with 2 babies hidden in a box, and everything I'd so carefully constructed just crumbled." "I'm sorry," Sarah began, but he cut her off. "Don't be. I'm not." He looked down at Lily again, and something like a smile ghosted across his face. "I'm terrified. I'm absolutely terrified. But I'm not sorry." They stood together in the soft light of the afternoon, the music box still playing its gentle melody. Emma slept peacefully in Sarah's arms. Lily continued to hold Alexander's finger in her tiny fist. And in that moment, Sarah understood that something fundamental had shifted, not just for Alexander, but for all of them. "Would you like to sit?" she offered. "You could hold her a while longer if you'd like." Alexander nodded and moved to the couch, settling carefully with Lily cradled against his chest. Sarah sat beside him with Emma, and they remained that way for nearly an hour, speaking occasionally, but mostly just existing in the peaceful quiet of 2 children sleeping and 2 adults learning to breathe again. The following days brought more changes. Alexander began taking his lunch in the suite, using the time to simply be present with Sarah and the twins. He asked questions about their routines, their development, their distinct personalities that were already emerging. Emma, it turned out, was the bold one, quick to cry when she wanted something but equally quick to offer gummy smiles. Lily was quieter, more observant, seeming to study the world with an intensity surprising for someone so small. Sarah found herself looking forward to these visits, not just because they broke up the isolated routine of new motherhood, but because she was discovering who Alexander Ashford really was beneath the armor. He was funny, with a dry wit that caught her off guard. He was thoughtful, remembering details from previous conversations and following up. He was gentle, his large hands learning to change diapers and warm bottles with increasing confidence. One evening, nearly 6 weeks after the day of discovery, Sarah was attempting to soothe both twins through a particularly fussy period. Emma was teething early and expressing her displeasure loudly, while Lily seemed to be crying in sympathy. Sarah was exhausted, bouncing one baby while trying to comfort the other, when Alexander appeared in the doorway. "Reinforcements," he announced, moving to take Emma without being asked. "You look like you could use backup." "I must look like a disaster," Sarah said, pushing her hair out of her face with her free hand. "You look like a mother doing an incredible job," Alexander corrected, settling into the rocking chair with Emma. He'd become comfortable in this space, in this role, in a way that seemed to surprise him as much as it did Sarah. They worked together to calm the girls, finding a rhythm that felt natural, practiced like they'd been doing this together for much longer than mere weeks. When both babies finally settled, Sarah found Alexander watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "about the future. About what happens when the girls get older, when they need more than this suite can provide." Sarah's heart sank. Here it was, the end she'd been waiting for. He'd been generous, impossibly kind, but eventually reality would reassert itself. "I've been saving," she said quickly. "I know I'll need to find a place soon." "That's not what I meant," Alexander interrupted. "Sarah, I've been thinking that this house has been too empty for too long. That I've been too empty for too long. And these past weeks with you and Emma and Lily." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "You've brought life back to these walls. You've brought life back to me. Alexander, let me finish. Please." He stood, still cradling Emma, and moved to stand before Sarah. "I know this is unconventional. I know we barely knew each other before all this began. But I feel that perhaps this isn't an accident. Perhaps you hiding those babies in a box under your bed, perhaps me finding you that day, perhaps all of it was meant to lead us here." Sarah's pulse quickened. "Here. I want you to stay. Not as my employee. As..." He struggled with the words. "I don't know what to call it yet. My partner? My family? All I know is that when I think about you leaving, about this house being silent again, about not seeing Emma's smile or feeling Lily's hand grip my finger," his voice caught. "I can't bear it." Tears streamed down Sarah's face. "Are you saying..." "I'm saying I want to try. To build something together. To be the family these girls deserve, and maybe the family we both need." He shifted Emma slightly, reaching out to cup Sarah's face with his free hand. "I'm saying I'm falling in love with all three of you, and it terrifies me, but I don't want to run from it anymore." Sarah leaned into his touch, her own heart so full it felt like it might burst. "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I tried not to. I told myself it was gratitude or circumstance or anything else. But it's not. It's real." Alexander leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be a father or a partner or any of it." "Neither do I," Sarah admitted with a watery laugh. "I'm 27 years old with twin newborns and no idea what I'm doing most of the time. Then we'll figure it out together." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, with Emma sleeping peacefully between them and Lily dozing in Sarah's arms. It was a kiss that tasted like hope, like second chances, like all the beautiful possibilities that emerge when broken people allow themselves to be loved. When they pulled apart, both twins were awake, as if they'd sensed the significance of the moment. Emma blinked up at Alexander with her dark eyes, and Lily made a small cooing sound in Sarah's arms. "I think they approve," Sarah said, smiling through her tears. "Good," Alexander replied, "because I've already started the paperwork." "Paperwork? To adopt them? Legally? If you'll allow it." He looked anxious suddenly, as if afraid he'd overstepped. "I want them to have my name, my protection, everything I can give them, but only if you want that too." Sarah could hardly believe what she was hearing. "You want to adopt my daughters?" "I want to adopt our daughters," Alexander corrected gently. "If you'll let me. If you'll give me the chance to be the father I never got to be for my Lily. To give Emma and Lily the life they deserve." "Yes," Sarah breathed. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They stood together in the soft glow of the suite's lamps, their unconventional family complete in ways that defied every expectation, every rule, every carefully constructed wall. Alexander Ashford, the billionaire who'd banned children from his home, now held an infant in his arms and love in his heart. Sarah Chin, the maid who'd hidden her babies in a box, now stood surrounded by more security and affection than she'd ever dreamed possible. And two tiny girls, born too early and into uncertain circumstances, slept peacefully in the arms of the parents who had found each other through them, who had found healing and hope and home in the most unexpected of places. Spring arrived at Ashford Manor like a promise being kept. The gardens that Henry tended so carefully burst into bloom, and Sarah would walk through them each morning with the twins in their new double stroller, another of Alexander's purchases that had appeared without fanfare. Emma and Lily, now 3 months old, were thriving. They'd gained weight, surpassed their developmental milestones, and developed distinct personalities that delighted everyone in the household. The manor itself had transformed. The sterile perfection that had once defined every room had given way to something warmer, more lived in. A playmat occupied a corner of the library, bright primary colors cheerfully disrupting the sophisticated neutrals. The formal dining room now housed a changing station for convenience, and Alexander's home office featured a bassinet where the twins often napped while he worked, their soft breathing providing a soundtrack he'd come to depend on. Sarah had moved from the Blue Guest suite into Alexander's wing, though they'd taken that step slowly, carefully. They were building something together, and neither wanted to rush it or let momentum carry them faster than wisdom would allow. Some nights, she slept in his room, wrapped in his arms, talking until dawn about everything and nothing. Other nights, she stayed in the nursery they'd created, wanting to be close when the twins woke for their midnight feedings. The adoption papers had been filed. Alexander's lawyers had worked with impressive speed, and the initial hearings had gone smoothly. Judge Matthews, a stern woman with silver hair and shrewd eyes, had interviewed them separately and together, clearly trying to understand this unusual situation. But when she'd seen Alexander with the twins, when she'd watched him tend to them with such obvious love and care, her expression had softened. "Mr. Ashford," she'd said during their last hearing, "I've presided over hundreds of adoption cases. I've seen many kinds of families come through my courtroom, but I must say, I've never seen a transformation quite like yours." "The transformation isn't mine, Your Honor," Alexander had replied, looking at Sarah. "It's ours." Now, on a warm April afternoon, Sarah sat in the newly created nursery, what had once been a guest bedroom now painted in soft yellows and greens, nursing Lily while Emma practiced her newfound ability to grab at the mobile hanging above her play gym. Alexander had left that morning for his first business trip since the twins arrived, and Sarah was surprised by how much she missed his presence. Her phone buzzed with a text. "How are my girls?" Sarah smiled and took a photo of Emma grabbing triumphantly at the mobile's dangling elephants, then another of Lily's peaceful face as she nursed. She sent both to Alexander. His response was immediate. "Beautiful. All 3 of you. Meeting running long. I'll be home late. Don't wait up." But Sarah did wait up. She put the twins down for the night, read for a while in the library, and then found herself in Alexander's office, looking at the photos that had slowly reappeared throughout the manor. Pictures of his sister, Rachel. Images of the first Lily, a cherubic toddler with Alexander's gray eyes. Photos that had been packed away for 12 years now sat proudly on shelves and mantels, no longer sources of pain, but honored memories. "I wish I could have met them," Sarah said quietly to the photograph of Rachel holding baby Lily. "I wish they could have met Emma and Lily. I think Rachel would have liked knowing that her brother finally let himself love again. I think she would have too." Sarah spun around to find Alexander in the doorway. He looked exhausted, his tie loosened and his normally immaculate appearance slightly rumpled. But his eyes were warm as he looked at her. "You're home early," she said, moving toward him. "I couldn't stand being away." He pulled her into his arms, resting his chin on top of her head. "I spent the entire meeting thinking about you 3. About how quiet the hotel room would be. About how I've spent years sleeping alone in silence, and now I can't imagine it." Sarah wrapped her arms around his waist. "The girls missed you too. Emma kept looking around like she was searching for you." "Did she?" Alexander pulled back slightly, a smile tugging at his lips. "Is that projection, or do you really think?" "I really think. She knows your voice, your smell. You're her father in every way that matters, Alexander. The papers are just formality." He kissed her then, deep and searching, and Sarah felt the familiar flutter in her stomach that his touch always provoked. But before things could intensify, They heard a cry through the baby monitor. Emma, waking from her sleep. Alexander pulled away with a rueful laugh. I'll get her. You've been on duty all day. Sarah watched him climb the stairs toward the nursery, his steps quick with eagerness rather than obligation. Through the monitor, she heard him enter the room, heard his voice drop to that special soft tone he used with the twins. Hey there, little one. Did you wake up missing your daddy? I missed you too. So much. You have no idea how much. There was rustling, then the sound of Emma's cries settling into quiet coos. That's my girl. You're getting so big, Emma. So strong. And so beautiful, just like your mama. A pause. I know I'm not your biological father. I know someday you'll have questions about that. But I want you to know something, okay? I want you to know that from the moment I saw you, from the very first time your mama let me hold you, you were mine. You and Lily both. Mine to love, mine to protect, mine to guide. And I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of that privilege. Sarah pressed her hand to her mouth, tears sliding down her cheeks as she listened to Alexander's whispered promises to their daughter. She climbed the stairs quietly and paused in the nursery doorway, watching as he changed Emma's diaper with practiced efficiency, talking to her the entire time about his day, about the meeting, about how much better his office was when it included a bassinet with 2 perfect babies. I love you, Sarah said softly. Alexander looked up, Emma cradled against his shoulder. His eyes shone with emotion. I love you too. More than I ever thought possible. I wasn't sure I'd ever feel safe enough to say that to someone, Sarah admitted, moving into the room. After Marcus, after being abandoned when I needed someone most, I thought maybe I was too broken to trust that way again. You're not broken, Alexander said firmly. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met. You brought 2 lives into the world alone. You protected them with everything you had. You asked for nothing and gave everything. He shifted Emma carefully, reaching out to cup Sarah's face. Marcus was a fool who threw away something precious. I intend to spend every day being grateful that his loss became my gain. Sarah leaned into his touch, letting herself be held by this man who had been so broken himself, who had built such high walls, and who had let her and their daughters dismantle those walls brick by brick. How did we get here? She wondered aloud. 2 people who were so alone, so afraid, and now we're a family, Alexander finished. The most unexpected, unorthodox, perfect family. Lily began to fuss in her crib, and Sarah moved to lift her, completing their circle. The 4 of them stood together in the soft glow of the nursery's nightlight, 2 adults who'd found each other through circumstance and choice, and 2 babies who'd brought them together. I want to marry you, Alexander said suddenly. I know it's fast. I know we're still learning each other. But I'm certain, Sarah. More certain than I've ever been about anything. Sarah's breath caught. Alexander. You don't have to answer now, he continued quickly. I haven't even gotten you a ring. I didn't plan this. The words just came out. But they're true. I want you to be my wife. I want Emma and Lily to have parents who are committed to each other as well as to them. I want to build this life with you, officially, permanently. Sarah looked down at Lily, then over at Emma in Alexander's arms. She thought about the girl she'd been 2 years ago, alone, working multiple jobs, dreaming of a stability that seemed impossible to achieve. She thought about her desperate decision to hide her newborns, about the terror of that moment when Alexander found her on the stairs. And she thought about everything that had happened since. The kindness he'd shown, the walls he'd torn down, the way he'd transformed from a man frozen in grief to a father who sang lullabies and changed diapers and whispered promises to sleeping babies. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I'll marry you. Alexander's face transformed, joy replacing the anxiety that had crept in during her silence. Really? Really? I can't imagine my life without you anymore. Can't imagine these girls growing up without you as their father. Can't imagine not waking up to your terrible singing in the shower, or the way you insist on making elaborate weekend breakfasts, even though you're a disaster in the kitchen. He laughed, the sound bright and free. My singing isn't that bad. It's pretty bad, Sarah teased, moving closer to kiss him. But I love it anyway. I love all of it. I love you. They stood together in the nursery, their daughters quiet in their arms, and made promises without words to protect this fragile, perfect thing they'd built, to nurture it, to face whatever challenges came with the strength of two people who'd already survived the worst and found each other on the other side. Later, after the twins had been put back down, Sarah and Alexander sat in the library with glasses of wine, talking about the future. The wedding would be small, they decided. Just the household staff who'd become family, maybe a few of Alexander's business associates, definitely Judge Matthews, who'd been so instrumental in the adoption proceedings. I want to do something else, Alexander said as they sat curled together on the sofa. Something I've been thinking about for weeks now. What's that? I want to establish a foundation. For single mothers. Women who find themselves in the position you were in, pregnant, alone, desperate. His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. I want to provide housing, medical care, job training, childcare. Everything you didn't have access to. Everything you deserved but had to struggle so hard to find. Sarah felt tears well up again. Alexander, that's beautiful. We could call it Rachel's legacy, he continued, his voice thick with emotion. After my sister. She would have loved this. Would have loved you. Would have been the first person offering support and help and hope. Then that's what we'll do, Sarah agreed. We'll take this second chance we've been given and use it to give second chances to others. They talked late into the night, planning and dreaming, building castles in the air that they had the resources and determination to make real. And when they finally climbed the stairs to bed, they paused together at the nursery door, looking in at their sleeping daughters. Thank you, Alexander whispered. For what? For hiding them in that box. For being brave enough to keep them safe, even when the odds were stacked against you. For giving me the chance to be a father again. For loving me despite everything I put between myself and the world. Sarah turned to face him, rising on her toes to press a kiss to his jaw. Thank you for finding us. For seeing past your pain to help us. For becoming the man who could love us the way we needed to be loved. They stood together in the hallway, watching their daughters sleep, and felt the weight and wonder of the life they were building. It wasn't the life either of them had planned. It wasn't what anyone would have predicted when Sarah first arrived at Ashford Manor with her resume and desperate hopes for employment. But it was theirs. Built from broken pieces and hidden hopes, from desperate measures and unexpected mercy, from the collision of two people who'd been alone too long and babies who'd brought them together. And it was perfect. The foundation became Sarah's passion project. Within 6 months of its inception, Rachel's legacy had helped 15 women find stable housing, secure employment, and access the medical care they needed. Sarah interviewed each applicant herself, seeing her own story reflected in their desperate eyes, their trembling hands, their fierce determination to provide for their children against impossible odds. Alexander supported her work completely, not just financially, but emotionally. He'd accompany her to site visits, hold babies while their mothers filled out paperwork, and share his own story of loss and redemption with a vulnerability that still surprised them both. The man who'd once locked himself away from anything that might cause pain now opened himself completely to other suffering, finding purpose in alleviating it. Emma and Lily thrived in this environment of love and purpose. At 9 months old, they were crawling everywhere, pulling themselves up on furniture, and babbling in what Alexander insisted was clearly advanced language development. Emma was the adventurer, constantly attempting to explore beyond her boundaries, while Lily was more cautious, preferring to observe before attempting new feats. The adoption had been finalized in late summer, and Alexander had cried openly in the courtroom when Judge Matthews pronounced them legally his daughters. Sarah had a photo from that day on her desk, Alexander holding both girls, tears streaming down his face, the purest expression of joy she'd ever seen. They'd married a week later in the manor's gardens, with Henry having created a floral wonderland for the occasion. Mrs. Patterson had made the cake, crying through the entire ceremony. The household staff had become their family in truth, invested in this unlikely love story and the children at its center. Now, on a crisp October afternoon, Sarah sat in the foundation's office while Alexander watched the twins. She was interviewing a young woman named Maria, 19 years old and 7 months pregnant, who'd been living in her car for the past 3 weeks. "I just need a chance," Maria said, her voice breaking. "I have a job, but it doesn't pay enough for an apartment deposit and everything a baby needs. I've been trying so hard, but I can't seem to get ahead." Sarah reached across the desk to take Maria's hand. "I understand. More than you know. Can I tell you my story?" She shared it all: the pregnancy, the abandonment, the desperate decision to hide her newborns in a box beneath her bed. Maria's eyes widened as the story unfolded, and by the end, tears were streaming down both their faces. "You hid them in a box," Maria whispered. "And you were working here in this mansion for a billionaire and he didn't know?" "Not for 3 days," Sarah confirmed. "And when he found out, I thought my life was over. Instead, it was just beginning." "But that's like a fairy tale," Maria said. "Things like that don't happen in real life." "Maybe not exactly like that," Sarah agreed. "But good things can happen, Maria. People can surprise you. And you deserve support and help and hope, not because you have to find a prince, but because you're a mother who's fighting for her child. That alone makes you worthy of every resource we can provide." They spent the next hour going through Rachel's Legacies program. Maria would receive a furnished apartment, rent-free for 6 months, while she established stability. She'd have access to prenatal care, pediatric services, and a job placement counselor. Once the baby was born, she'd have subsidized childcare and continued support.
Why?
Maria asked finally. "Why do all this for strangers?" "Because someone did it for me," Sarah said simply. "And because every mother deserves a chance to be the parent she wants to be, without poverty and fear destroying that possibility." When Maria left, clutching the folder of information and the key to her new apartment, Sarah sat back in her chair and let herself feel the satisfaction of this work. Each woman they helped was a life changed, a child given a better start, a cycle potentially broken. Her phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. "Emma just took 4 steps. Actual steps. Lily is not impressed by her sisters showing off." Sarah laughed and texted back. "Be home in an hour. Don't let her attempt stairs without supervision. Already blocked them. I'm learning." A pause, then. "I'm proud of you. Of what you're building." "We're building it together," Sarah corrected. "I love you. Love you more." When Sarah arrived home that evening, she found Alexander in the living room with both girls. Emma was indeed practicing her walking, wobbling between furniture pieces with determined concentration. Lily sat with a pile of blocks, methodically sorting them by color in a way that suggested she'd inherited her father's analytical mind. "Mama!" Emma shrieked, abandoning her walking practice to crawl rapidly to Sarah. "Look at you, sweet girl," Sarah said, scooping her up. "Daddy told me you're walking now. Show Mama?" Alexander helped Emma to her feet, and she took 5 wavering steps into Sarah's arms before tumbling forward, with a giggle. Lily, not to be outdone, held up a block and said clearly, "Blue." Sarah and Alexander locked eyes in shock. "Did she just?" Sarah began. "Her first word," Alexander confirmed, moving quickly to scoop up Lily. "You brilliant girl." "Yes, that's blue."
Can you say it again?
"Blue," Lily repeated, then pointed at Alexander's shirt.
Blue.
They spent the next hour celebrating these milestones, calling Mrs. Patterson and Henry to share the news, taking videos to document everything. These moments of ordinary parenting magic felt especially precious to both Sarah and Alexander, who'd each arrived at parenthood through such extraordinary circumstances. Later, after the girls were asleep, Sarah found Alexander in his office, looking at financial reports for the foundation. He'd insisted on matching every donation they received, effectively doubling their resources. "We can expand," he said when she entered. "Open a second location. Maybe partner with hospitals to catch women earlier, before they reach crisis point." Sarah moved behind his chair, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. "You've given so much already. Not nearly enough." He pulled her around to sit in his lap. "Sarah, I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. It sat in accounts doing nothing while I hid in this house, avoiding life. Now I can use it for something that matters. For continuing my sister's legacy. For honoring the woman who would have been the first person helping you if she'd been alive. Rachel would have loved you, Sarah said softly. Not the you from before, but the you that you've become. The father, the husband, the advocate. I couldn't have become this person without you, Alexander replied. Without Emma and Lily. You broke me open, Sarah. You, and those twins hidden in a box. You shattered every wall I'd built and showed me that living afraid isn't living at all. They sat together in comfortable silence, Sarah's head on Alexander's shoulder, his arms around her waist. Outside the window, the October moon rose over the gardens, casting silver light across the grounds where Emma and Lily would play tomorrow, where they'd learn to run and jump and grow. I got a call today, Alexander said eventually, from a producer at 60 Minutes. They want to do a story about Rachel's legacy. About us. Sarah straightened to look at him. What did you say? I said I'd discuss it with you. Our story is private, Sarah. It's precious. I won't exploit it for publicity unless you're comfortable with it. Sarah considered. What's the angle they want? Redemption, second chances, using wealth for good. The usual. He paused. But also highlighting the real issue. How many women face the choice you did? How broken the system is that a smart, employed, capable woman felt her only option was to hide newborns in a box. Then we should do it, Sarah decided. If it brings attention to the foundation, if it helps more women, if it shows even one person that their circumstances don't define their worth, we should do it. Alexander smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. The interview was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In the interim, Sarah and Alexander talked extensively about what they were comfortable sharing, where their boundaries were, how to protect Emma and Lily's privacy, while still telling their story honestly. When the day arrived, the 60 Minutes crew set up in the library where so much of their story had unfolded. Sarah wore a simple blue dress. Alexander was in slacks and a sweater, looking more relaxed than Sarah had ever seen him in professional contexts. The correspondent, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Chun, no relation to Sarah, though they joked about it, started with the basics. Mr. Ashford, you're known for being intensely private. Why agree to this interview? Because privacy is a luxury, Alexander replied. I've had the luxury of dealing with my grief privately, of processing my trauma away from public scrutiny. But Sarah didn't have that luxury. Thousands of women don't have that luxury. And if sharing our story can help even one person, then it's worth sacrificing some privacy. Patricia turned to Sarah. Take me back to that day. When you knew you were going into labor, what was going through your mind? Sarah took a deep breath.
Terror.
Absolute terror. I was alone, 6 weeks earlier than expected, and I knew if I called for help, if I went to the hospital, I'd lose everything. My job, my housing, my only source of stability. She glanced at Alexander, who nodded encouragingly. But my daughters needed to be born. So, I made a choice. It wasn't a good choice. It was desperate. But it's the choice thousands of women make every day, between the care they need and the stability they can't afford to lose. The interview continued, Patricia expertly drawing out the emotional core of their story, while respecting the boundaries they'd established. When she asked about the moment Alexander discovered the twins, Sarah watched her husband's face transform with remembered emotion. I heard crying, he said. And I found Sarah on the back stairs, holding these bundles, looking absolutely terrified. And I was angry at first. Angry that she'd broken my rules. But then I saw the babies and I saw her face, and all that anger disappeared. All I could think was that my sister had been in this position once. Alone, pregnant, desperate. And someone had helped her. How could I not do the same? But you did more than help, Patricia pointed out. You fell in love. You built a family. You adopted the twins. I did, Alexander confirmed, his voice thick. Because they're my daughters. From the first moment I held Lily, feeling her tiny hand grip my finger, I knew. This was my second chance. Not just to be a father, but to be the person my sister would have wanted me to be. The segment on Rachel's legacy was powerful. They showed the apartments, interviewed several mothers the foundation had helped, highlighted the measurable impact it was having. Maria, who'd been 7 months pregnant during her intake, appeared on screen with her healthy baby boy, talking about how the program had literally saved their lives. When the episode aired 6 weeks later, the response was overwhelming. Donations poured in from across the country. Advocacy groups reached out about partnerships. 3 other cities inquired about opening similar programs. And Sarah received thousands of messages from women sharing their own stories of desperation and difficult choices. "We've struck a nerve," she said to Alexander as they read through the messages together one evening. "There are so many women out there who are facing this right now." "Then we expand," Alexander said decisively. "We turn Rachel's legacy into a national organization. We franchise the model. We partner with every city that's willing to work with us." They were in the library when Mrs. Patterson appeared at the door, looking flustered. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's someone at the gate. A young woman with a baby. She's crying and asking for Sarah. She said she saw the 60 Minutes episode." Sarah and Alexander exchanged glances. "Let her in," Sarah said. "And Mrs. Patterson, could you please check on the girls? We might be a while." The young woman who appeared in the library doorway was barely 20, with dark circles under her eyes and a baby who couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. She held the infant with the fierce protectiveness Sarah recognized all too well. "I'm sorry," the woman said immediately. "I know I shouldn't just show up, but I saw your story, and I didn't know where else to go. I'm getting evicted tomorrow. My boyfriend left. I have nowhere to take my son, and I just thought, maybe—" She dissolved into tears. Sarah was across the room in seconds, guiding the woman to the couch. "It's okay. You did the right thing coming here. What's your name?" "Jessica. And this is Noah." Alexander knelt beside them, his expression gentle. "Jessica, we're going to help you. That's what we do. That's what this foundation exists for. You and Noah are going to be okay." Over the next hour, they made arrangements. Jessica would stay in the Blue Guest Suite, the room where Sarah and the twins had first found sanctuary, until they could place her in one of the foundation's apartments. They'd connect her with resources, help her find employment, ensure Noah had everything he needed. As Alexander showed Jessica to her room, Sarah stood in the library where this had all begun. She thought about the terrified girl she'd been, hiding her babies in a box. She thought about Alexander, frozen in grief and isolation. She thought about all the broken pieces that had somehow come together to create something whole and beautiful. Emma and Lily appeared in the doorway, having escaped from Mrs. Patterson's supervision. At 13 months, they were toddlers now, Emma walking confidently and Lily not far behind. They ran to Sarah, wrapping their small arms around her legs. "Mama," they both said, and Sarah's heart swelled with the same wonder she'd felt the first time they'd used the word. "My sweet girls," she said, scooping them both up even though they were getting too big for it. "My brave, beautiful girls." Alexander returned and wrapped his arms around all 3 of them. Jessica settled. "Mrs. Patterson is making her something to eat." He kissed Sarah's temple. "You know this is going to keep happening, right? We're going to have women showing up at our door." "I know," Sarah said. "Is that okay?" "More than okay." He looked down at Emma and Lily. "I think it's perfect. Our daughters are growing up seeing that when people need help, you provide it. That privilege comes with responsibility. That love multiplies when you share it." That night, Sarah stood in the nursery doorway, watching Alexander put the girls to bed. He'd gotten so good at this, the routine of stories and songs, the gentle but firm insistence on sleep time, the way he could soothe even the most resistant toddler into compliance. "Story," Emma demanded. "Which one?" Alexander asked, settling into the rocking chair with both girls in his lap. "Princess," Lily supplied. "Ah, the princess story. Should I tell you the real princess story?" He glanced at Sarah with a smile. "Once upon a time, there was a very sad man who lived in a big, empty house." Sarah listened as Alexander transformed their story into a fairy tale for their daughters. He made Sarah the brave princess who had to hide her most precious treasures from a dragon. He made himself the knight who'd forgotten how to be brave until the princess reminded him. And he made Emma and Lily the magical beings who'd broken an evil spell and brought love back to the kingdom. It was silly and sweet, and so filled with love that Sarah had to wipe tears from her eyes. When both girls had fallen asleep, Alexander carefully transferred them to their cribs and joined Sarah in the hallway. "That was beautiful," she whispered. "It's our story," he replied, pulling her close. "The one I want them to know. That love wins. That second chances exist. That the darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures." They walked downstairs hand in hand, past the photos of Rachel and the first Lily that no longer carried only grief, but also hope. They checked on Jessica, who'd fallen asleep with Noah in the blue suite, exhaustion and relief written on both their faces. And they ended up in the library, where they'd conducted the interview, where they'd held countless foundation meetings, where their life together had truly begun. "Do you ever think about that day?" Sarah asked. "About what would have happened if you'd reacted differently?" "Every day," Alexander admitted. "But not with regret. With gratitude. Because that was the day my real life started. The day I stopped just existing and started living again." Sarah leaned against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. Outside, the October night was clear and cold, stars bright in the darkness. But inside the Ashford Manor, warmth radiated from every corner, the warmth of purpose found, of love given and received, of family built from the wreckage of two separate lives. They'd started as maid and employer, as desperate mother and grieving billionaire. They'd become partners, parents, advocates, and, most unexpectedly, they'd become each other's salvation. And it had all started with two tiny girls hidden in a box, two hearts brave enough to break open, and the willingness to believe that broken things could be made whole again. 5 years later, Sarah stood on the stage of the Javits Center in Manhattan, addressing an audience of 3,000 people at the National Conference on Family Homelessness. Behind her, a screen displayed the Rachel's Legacy logo, a simple design of two hands cradling a heart, created by Emma during an art session when she was 3. "When I was 27 years old," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the audience, "I gave birth to twins in a servant's quarters of a Manhattan mansion. I had no partner, no family, and nowhere to go. So I hid my newborn daughters in a box under my bed and prayed no one would find them." The audience was silent, captivated. Sarah had told this story hundreds of times now, but it never got easier. The memory of that desperation, that fear, remained as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. The man who owned that mansion had one rule: no children allowed. He'd suffered an unimaginable tragedy and had built his entire life around avoiding further pain. By any logical measure, when he discovered me and my secret, I should have been fired. I should have been homeless with 2 3-day-old infants and no prospects. Sarah paused, letting her gaze sweep across the crowd. Instead, he helped me. And in helping me, he saved not just my life and my daughters' lives, but his own. Today, I'm proud to announce that Rachel's legacy has expanded to 47 cities nationwide. We've helped over 15,000 mothers and their children find stable housing, employment, and the support they need to thrive. The applause was thunderous. Sarah waited for it to die down before continuing. "But this isn't my story to tell alone. Please welcome my husband, Alexander Ashford." Alexander joined her on stage, and even after 5 years of marriage, Sarah's heart still skipped at the sight of him. He'd aged well, the gray at his temples adding distinction, the lines around his eyes the result of laughter rather than grief now. "Thank you all for being here," Alexander said into the microphone. 5 years ago, I stood in a courtroom and officially became the father of 2 little girls who'd been born into impossible circumstances. Today, those girls are 6 years old. They're in 1st grade. They have opinions about everything from breakfast cereal to climate change. And they've taught me more about courage, resilience, and love than I ever imagined possible. He glanced at Sarah, his expression tender. But they're not the only children who've changed my life. Through Rachel's legacy, I've met hundreds of children. Children who might have grown up in poverty and instability, but who instead have a fighting chance. Children whose mothers were given the same opportunity Sarah was, the chance to parent with dignity, with support, and with hope. The presentation continued with statistics, case studies, and testimonials from women the foundation had helped. Maria, who Sarah had interviewed 5 years ago, was now the foundation's director of community outreach. Jessica, who'd shown up at their door after the 60 Minutes episode, had completed her nursing degree and worked at the foundation's health clinic. After the conference, Sarah and Alexander returned to their hotel suite where Mrs. Patterson was watching Emma and Lily. The girls had begged to come to New York, fascinated by their mother's stories of the city. Mama, Daddy. Emma launched herself at them the moment they entered. At 6, she was tall for her age, with Alexander's gray eyes and Sarah's dark hair. Mrs. Patterson took us to Central Park and we saw a dog that was this big. Bigger than a horse, Lily added solemnly. She was quieter than her twin, more analytical, but equally enthusiastic when properly engaged. Also, we had 3 ice creams. 2 ice creams, Mrs. Patterson corrected firmly, though her eyes twinkled. The third was a frozen yogurt. Sarah laughed, gathering both girls into her arms. Sounds like you had quite an adventure. Did you thank Mrs. Patterson? Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. Both girls chorused dutifully. After Mrs. Patterson left, promising to return in the morning to help wrangle the girls on the train ride home, Sarah and Alexander sat with their daughters on the hotel couch, listening to elaborate descriptions of their day. Emma did most of the talking, her hands gesturing wildly, while Lily interjected with precise corrections and additional details. Girls, Alexander said during a rare pause in the narrative, do you know what Mama and I were doing today? Talking about helping people, Emma said immediately. Being brave, Lily added. Sarah exchanged surprised glances with Alexander. What makes you say that, Lily? Because you always say that helping people when they're scared is brave, Lily explained with 6-year-old logic. And you said the lady's mama helps her scared, so helping them is brave. That's exactly right, Alexander confirmed, pulling Lily onto his lap. And do you know why this work is so important to us? Emma climbed into Sarah's lap without being asked. Because of the box. Sarah's breath caught. They told the girls a simplified version of their origin story, that Mama had needed help when they were babies and Daddy had provided it, but they'd never mentioned the box specifically. What do you know about the box, sweetheart? We heard you telling that lady last week, Emma said matter-of-factly. The one who came to visit. You said you hid us in a box because you were scared and didn't know what else to do. But Daddy found you and wasn't mad, Lily continued. He helped you instead. And now you help other people like the lady at her house. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. There was currently a young mother named Alicia staying in the blue suite with her infant son. The girls had been fascinated by the baby, eager to help in small ways, completely unaware of the parallel to their own story. That's right, Sarah said softly. When you were born, things were very hard for Mama. I didn't have a lot of money or anyone to help me. And I made some choices that weren't perfect because I was trying to keep you safe. But Daddy did help, Emma said firmly. And now you're married and we live in the big house and you help other mamas. Exactly, Alexander confirmed. His voice was thick with emotion. Sometimes people need help, and it's important that we provide it. Because somebody helped us when we needed it most. Was it Aunt Rachel? Lily asked. The girls had grown up surrounded by photos and stories of Alexander's sister, who'd been gone years before they were born but whose presence remained strong in their lives. In a way, yes, Alexander said. Aunt Rachel taught me about love and family and second chances. And when I met Mama and you too, I remembered those lessons. I remembered that being afraid of loving people isn't the same as being safe from pain. It's just being lonely. The conversation was perhaps too complex for 6-year-olds to fully grasp, but Sarah could see them processing, their little minds working to understand the weight of what their parents were sharing. I'm glad you weren't lonely anymore, Emma said simply, hugging Sarah tighter. Me too, Lily agreed, snuggling against Alexander. Later that night, after the girls were asleep in the adjoining room, Sarah and Alexander stood at the hotel window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. Somewhere out there was the Ashford Manor, the house that had been his prison, and then their sanctuary. "We're selling it," Alexander said suddenly. Sarah turned to look at him. "What?" "The manor. I've been thinking about it for months. It's too big, too isolated. And I don't want the girls growing up in a house that was designed to keep the world out." He took her hands. "I want us to find a real home. Something that fits who we've become, not who I was trying to be when I built those walls." Sarah processed this. The manor had been part of their story, the setting for their unlikely beginning. But Alexander was right. They'd outgrown it. The foundation had expanded beyond anything they'd imagined, requiring more of their time and presence in the city. The girls would soon need to attend school, have friends nearby, exist in a community rather than isolated splendor. "Where would we go?" she asked. "I was thinking we could buy something in Brooklyn, near Prospect Park. A brownstone, maybe, with enough room for us and for 1 or 2 guest suites for foundation clients who need temporary housing. Something that's home but also connected to the work we do." Sarah smiled, rising on her toes to kiss him. "I love it. I love you. And I love that you've grown so much that you can let go of the manor without fear." "I don't need a fortress anymore," Alexander said simply. "I have you. I have Emma and Lily. I have purpose. That's all the safety I need." They found the perfect brownstone 3 months later, a beautiful 4-story building with original details, a small backyard, and enough space for their family plus 2 furnished apartments for Rachel's legacy clients. The girls were thrilled, especially when they learned they'd each have their own room. The move happened in early spring, when the cherry blossoms were blooming in Prospect Park. Mrs. Patterson came with them, declaring she was too old to train a new family. Henry retired but promised to help design their modest backyard garden. The other staff were provided generous severance packages and letters of recommendation that would ensure they landed on their feet. The manor itself was purchased by a young family, a tech entrepreneur and his wife with 3 children. Sarah and Alexander met them during the final walkthrough and felt satisfied that the house would once again be filled with life and laughter. "Treat it well," Alexander said to the new owner. "This house gave me back my life. I hope it does the same for you." On their first night in the brownstone, Sarah and Alexander sat on the back porch while Emma and Lily chased fireflies in the yard. The sounds of the city were different here, less isolated than the manor, more alive. Children played in neighboring yards. Couples walked past on the sidewalk. Music drifted from open windows. "This is perfect," Sarah said, leaning against Alexander's shoulder. "It is," he agreed. "Though I admit, I'm going to miss having a library the size of most people's apartments." Sarah laughed. "We have a perfectly nice library. It just happens to also be the living room." Emma ran up to the porch, breathless and glowing. "Mama, there's a girl next door who's my age. Her name is Sophia, and she has a trampoline." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Sarah said. "Did you introduce yourself nicely?"
Yes.
"And Lily, too." Emma bounced on her toes. "Can we play there tomorrow?" "If it's okay with Sophia's parents, then yes." Emma squealed and ran back to share the news with Lily. The twins had always been close, but they were also developing their own friendships, their own identities. Emma was the extrovert, making friends easily and diving into new experiences. Lily was more cautious, preferring deep connections with a few people, showing a remarkable aptitude for music and mathematics. "They're so different," Alexander marveled watching them. "How did we get so lucky?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "Some days I still can't believe this is real. That I went from hiding them in a box to this, to a home we own, to a foundation that's changing lives, to you and this life we've built." "It's real," Alexander assured her, pulling her close. "Every impossible, beautiful bit of it." The years continued to unfold with their own rhythms and challenges. Emma and Lily thrived in their new school, making friends and discovering passions. Emma fell in love with soccer and theater, always the center of attention, always performing. Lily gravitated toward the chess club and science fairs, quietly brilliant and increasingly confident in her own way. Rachel's legacy continued to expand. By the time the twins were 10, the foundation operated in all 50 states, had helped over 50,000 families, and had become a model for public-private partnerships addressing family homelessness. Sarah had written a book about their journey, which became a bestseller and funded the creation of an endowment that would ensure the foundation's work continued for generations. Alexander had gradually stepped back from his business empire, appointing capable leadership and using his time to focus on advocacy work. He testified before Congress about the need for comprehensive family support systems. He wrote op-eds and gave speeches. He used his privilege and platform to amplify voices that were usually marginalized. And through it all, they remained grounded in the simple truth that had started everything: love transforms, second chances matter, and the most broken situations can become the most beautiful. On Emma and Lily's 13th birthday, Sarah and Alexander took them to the Ashford Manor. The new family had graciously agreed to let them visit, understanding the significance of the place to their story. The girls had seen photos, of course, but standing in the actual space was different. They wandered through the rooms, eyes wide at the scale and grandeur. "This was your bedroom?" Emma asked, standing in what had been Sarah's small servants' quarters. "It was," Sarah confirmed. "And the box where I hid you is right there, under where that dresser is now." Lily knelt beside the dresser, her hand resting on the floor. "It must have been so scary." "It was the scariest time of my life," Sarah admitted. "But it led to the best parts of my life. To Daddy, to our family, to all of this." Alexander stood in the doorway, his hand on Sarah's shoulder. "You know what I realized recently?" he said. "That day I found you on the stairs, it wasn't an accident that I was in the staff wing. I'd been hearing soft noises for days, sounds I couldn't identify. I told myself I was checking on a possible maintenance issue, but I think part of me knew something was happening. Something that needed attention." "You came looking for us," Lily said softly. "It wasn't a question." "I suppose I did," Alexander agreed. "I just didn't know what I was looking for until I found it." They showed the girls the library where Alexander had first held them, the guest room where they'd stayed during those early weeks, the gardens where they'd taken their first steps. Each space held memories, layers of their shared history. "Can we see the spot where you got married?" Emma asked. They walked to the garden where Henry had created such beauty for their wedding. It looked different now. The new family had their own aesthetic, but the basic structure remained. Sarah could still see exactly where she'd stood, where Alexander had slipped the ring on her finger, where they'd promised to love each other through whatever came. "We should renew our vows," Alexander said suddenly. "Right here, where it all began. A 10-year anniversary celebration." Sarah looked at him, her heart swelling with love. "I'd like that." They did exactly that 6 months later, on a crisp October afternoon that mirrored the weather on their original wedding day. But this ceremony was bigger, louder, filled with the dozens of families Rachel's legacy had helped, the staff who'd become dear friends, and the community they'd built around them. Emma and Lily were junior bridesmaids, dressed in elegant gowns they'd helped choose. They stood beside their parents as Sarah and Alexander renewed their promises, adding new words forged from a decade of partnership. "I promise to keep growing with you," Sarah said, her hands clasped in Alexander's. "To keep believing in second chances and the power of love to transform even the darkest circumstances. To keep building this life we've created, one day and one act of kindness at a time." "I promise to never build walls again," Alexander replied, his voice strong and clear. "To stay open to love and pain and all the messy beauty of life. To honor your courage by being courageous myself. To be the father our daughters deserve and the partner you've always been to me." As they kissed, surrounded by everyone who'd been part of their journey, Sarah felt the weight and wonder of how far they'd come. From a desperate maid hiding newborns in a box to this, to a family celebrated, a love honored, a life built on the foundation of mercy given and received. The reception was held in the brownstones' backyard, which had been transformed with lights and flowers. Emma and Lily gave a speech together, Emma doing most of the talking while Lily interjected key details, their partnership a reflection of their parents' own teamwork. "Our parents' story is weird," Emma announced, to laughter from the crowd. Most people don't meet when one person is hiding babies in a box. But it's also beautiful, because it shows that even when things seem impossible, even when you're scared and don't know what to do, love can find a way. Love and courage, Lily added. Mama was brave when she protected us. Daddy was brave when he helped us. And together, they've been brave enough to help thousands of other families. That's what we want to do too. Be brave enough to help people. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes as Alexander pulled her close. Their daughters had understood the essence of their story, had internalized the values they'd tried to model. Whatever else they achieved in life, this felt like their greatest success. As the celebration continued around them, Sarah took a moment to stand apart with Alexander, looking at the life they'd created. The brownstone glowed with warmth and light. Music played. Children laughed. Friends embraced. And at the center of it all, Emma and Lily danced together. These two souls who'd been born into such uncertainty and who now radiated confidence and joy. "We did it," Sarah whispered. "We actually did it." "We did," Alexander agreed. "Though I'd argue we're still doing it. This isn't a destination, Sarah. It's a journey we get to take together." She turned to face him fully, this man who'd been so broken when they met, who'd built such high walls, who'd been so certain he could never love again. "Do you remember what you told me that first day? When you found us?" "I told you a lot of things. You said your daughter needed medical attention. You called them yours from the very beginning." Alexander's eyes grew misty. "Because they were. From the moment I saw them, they were mine. You were all mine. I just didn't know how to admit it yet. And now I can't imagine a life without you, without them, without all of this." He gestured to the party, to the life they'd built. "You saved me, Sarah. You and those twins hidden in a box, you saved my life." "No," Sarah corrected gently. "We saved each other. And then we saved ourselves. And now we get to spend the rest of our lives helping others do the same." They rejoined the party, dancing with their daughters, celebrating with their community, living fully in the joy they'd fought so hard to find. And as the October stars emerged overhead, Sarah Ashford felt a peace, so profound it took her breath away. She'd started as a frightened girl with nowhere to turn. She'd hidden her most precious treasures in a box, hoping desperately for mercy she had no reason to expect. And she'd found not just mercy, but love, transformative, redemptive, world-changing love. The billionaire who never allowed children in his house had become a father who couldn't imagine his home without them. The maid who'd hidden her newborns had become an advocate changing lives across the nation. And two tiny babies who'd started life in a cardboard box beneath a bed were now thriving young women who understood that their very existence had sparked a revolution of love. It wasn't a fairy tale.
It was better than that.
It was real, messy and complicated, and absolutely beautiful. It was a testament to the power of second chances, to the courage it takes to love after loss, to the truth that our darkest moments can become the foundation for our brightest futures. And as Emma and Lily pulled their parents onto the dance floor for one more song, as the community they'd built celebrated around them, as the life they'd fought for unfolded in all its imperfect glory, Sarah knew with absolute certainty this was exactly where they were meant to be. Not despite the box, but because of it. Not in spite of their broken beginnings, but transformed by them. Together, complete and gloriously, impossibly, perfectly whole.